You should just eat in the bathroom. That suits you best.
I was furious at Emma, my daughter-in-law, and my son Bob's words. I couldn't forgive them for neglecting my dear father. They better be prepared. What happened? The usual stuff. What? I couldn't overlook Bob and Emma's behavior any longer. I decided to fight back. My name is Catherine. I'm 60 years old. My family consists of my 80-year-old father and my 40-year-old son Bob. Originally, my son lived with my husband and I, but my father was left alone following my mother's passing. We decided Bob should live with him. It was comforting since that home is also the house where I spent my childhood. There's a bit of distance between where I currently live and my parents' home, so visiting my father often was challenging. I was grateful when my son volunteered to move in with him. I'm worried about Grandpa, and I wanted to try living somewhere else. Bob had never moved out before. He even commuted to college from home and probably longed for an independent life. Thank you, please take care of Grandpa. I entrusted my father to my son. At that time, my son was 40. He was still single. I hoped he would find someone special, and soon that wish would come true. 6 months after my son started living with my father, he called me. What's the matter? I'm getting married. Married? I was shocked by my son's sudden announcement. There was no sign of a girlfriend, so this quick marriage was a surprise. When did you start seeing someone? I met her through a friend soon after I started living with Grandpa. She's a really nice person. I felt relieved at his words. My son would be all right now. Then came the day of the family meeting. At the family meeting, my husband James and I participated. Nice to meet you. I greeted Emma, who was to be my son's wife. Hello, I'm Bob's father. My husband followed with his greeting. Emma was a tall, slender blonde with sharp eyes. She was beautiful, but her behavior quickly changed my impression of her.
This is your mom and dad?
Emma looked us up and down condescendingly. Being stared at by someone you've just met is quite uncomfortable. Is something wrong? I asked Emma. Then Emma replied.
You don't look anything like your mom.
Me and Mom?
Yeah, exactly.
Indeed, my son and I don't resemble each other. He probably takes after his father more. I was aware of this, but I never expected to hear it from Emma, whom I just met. Emma continued.
Where's your grandpa?
He lives here.
What? I thought it was just the two of us.
Emma seemed unaware that my father and son were living together. I assumed it was common knowledge.
Come on,
she suddenly complained, acting childishly. Emma is the same age as my son, but didn't seem her age at all.
I thought I'd be living with you alone, Bob.
My son looked disturbed by her behavior. My husband was also visibly surprised by Emma's outburst, but he must have chosen her for a reason. Even as she threw a tantrum, my son looked at her kindly and calmed her down. It's okay, I'll take care of Grandpa.
Really?
I won't give you that burden.
If that's the case, I'm fine with that.
Emma seemed convinced by my son's words. However, I remembered that violent appearance from earlier. I was speechless when I saw that. Was she ignoring us, or did she simply not see us? Either way, it seemed like she only had eyes for my son. In a way, it's sweet, but as her future mother-in-law, I'm full of worries. Can I get along with her? Her first impression was so overwhelming that I found myself disliking Emma, despite just having met her. My husband later admitted he felt the same way. Will everything be okay? I'm worried too. The problem wasn't just with Emma. I was also concerned about her living with my father. Clearly, she was reluctant to live with him. Despite my son's willingness to care for my father, I feared Emma might be cold towards him. Even during the family meeting, she barely spoke to me and seemed distant. It was the same with my husband. I'm not just worried about myself, but mostly about my father. I usually don't visit often, but now I know I should check in regularly. I made a promise to myself to do that. There was no news from my son and Emma for a month after their marriage. I thought my son would contact me if there were any problems, but so far there's been no word. I assumed this meant things were going well, so I decided to leave them be. Above all, I wanted to avoid any interaction with Emma. Then, one day, Bob and Emma suddenly returned home. Emma looked visibly upset. I asked what had happened.
I just don't get your dad.
Emma was angry at my father. She said she had been on the phone loudly with friends until late at night, and my father had stormed into her room. But it was after 2 a.m. That's normally when most people are asleep. I couldn't help but sympathize with my father.
I told you I didn't want to deal with David, didn't I?
Emma was angry not with my son, but with me. I couldn't understand why she was angry at me. It was my son who decided to live with his grandfather, not at my command. Emma was just lashing out.
I wanted to live quietly with Bob, so why does it have to be this way?
That's because
you don't even care to look after your own parent.
That last comment struck me hard. After she had her say and seemed satisfied, she left. Are you okay? My husband, who had witnessed the whole thing, asked with concern. She's a difficult person, isn't she? If you have any problems, just let me know. He reassured me kindly. Thank you. In my nearly 60 years of life, this was the first time I'd been so blamed by someone younger than me. Of course, at work, I would apologize for any mistakes I made, but Emma's accusations were blatantly unreasonable, and this wasn't the way to treat a mother-in-law. I knew I should care for my father as his daughter, but he wants to continue living in that house. The house filled with memories of my mother and I. He's still able to take care of himself, and forcibly moving him didn't seem right. It was a decision I made after much thought, and my son agreed to live with him. I didn't think Emma had any right to interfere. This incident made me even less inclined to talk to Emma. However, avoiding her proved difficult.
Hey, are you there?
Emma suddenly came to visit alone, without my son. It was the first time she'd come by herself. What could it be? And was she calling for me? Her refusal to even say my name irritated me further. I wondered if Emma lacked basic manners. What's going on? Reluctantly, I went outside. Emma looked at me with distaste.
Oh, you are here.
It was me she was calling after all. Then she started yelling at me.
This is all your fault.
My fault?
Yes, I married Bob, thinking we'd live together, so why do I have to live with David too?
She was still holding a grudge about that. I asked Emma, Isn't Bob taking care of my father? My son had said he would take care of him, but Emma's response was different.
He doesn't look after him at all and leaves everything to me. It's ruining our married life.
Then she glared at me.
It's all because of you.
She left without waiting for my response. I wanted to explain to Emma that my father wanted to stay in his house, but it seemed pointless now. Emma wasn't willing to listen. Anything I said would be met with resistance. The situation made me want to avoid Emma even more. But I was concerned about my son not caring for my father. One day, worried about my father, I decided to visit home after a long time. Even if he could take care of himself, I was worried if my son really wasn't looking after him. 2 years after my son and Emma got married, they had a child, my grandchild. I decided to visit at Christmas. I was excited to meet my first grandchild, but now my son and his wife are probably focused on their child. I felt like my father was being put on the back burner. I couldn't forgive Emma for treating my father like a nuisance. Finally, the day came and I returned home. It was my first visit in 6 months. I'm home. Emma made an unmistakably displeased face when I arrived. I was used to her attitude by now. It probably wouldn't change. I went straight to my father's room. Huh? The room, which used to be my father's, was now a nursery. Had they given it up for the grandchild? Then as I stepped out, I saw my father in the garden. What are you doing out here? I asked. Why was he sleeping outside in the cold? Suddenly, Emma brought some food.
Here's today's portion. Eat it in the bathroom as usual.
The bathroom? I was shocked by her words. Why was my father eating in the bathroom? It's the usual thing, my father answered. What? Emma was treating him terribly. He had to eat in the bathroom and sleep outside. It was as if he wasn't even considered a person. I also got angry at my son for not saying anything. If this was usual, it meant my son was also treating him badly. Unforgivable. I decided to fight back against my son and Emma. I went to convince my father. Won't you come live with us? But he shook his head. This house has memories. This was expected, but I didn't persuade him. He would continue to be mistreated by my son and his wife. Who knows what they might do to him next? It's not good to stay here anymore. Come live with us. But I will never make you feel this way. Come and live in our house. It took time to persuade him, but eventually my father agreed. I felt sorry for my father, but this was the only way to retaliate against my son. Thus, my father came to live with me. My husband gladly accepted him. I really hope David can relax at our house. Thank you so much. I'm deeply grateful for my husband's kindness. When I told my son and his wife about my father moving in with us, they just responded with, Is that so? Emma must be relieved, I thought. Just imagining her face made me angry. And this was the start of my real retaliation against my son and his wife. One day, my son returned from a 2-week visit to Emma's parents' house to find his house had been demolished. What's going on all of a sudden? He was understandably confused. The house he was living in was suddenly turned into a vacant lot. I called my son to our house. Why are you calling me out of the blue? He was angry, but I needed to tell him the truth. Hearing my story, he got even angrier. Why did you demolish the house without telling us? Well, you don't need Dad, right? What does Grandpa have to do with this? I don't want you and your wife taking over the house filled with memories. I said it firmly, knowing I couldn't falter. You're neglecting Dad, aren't you? I asked my son. Then the doorbell rang. Honestly, it was a pain to have visitors come at a time like this. Who could it be at this time? I coldly said to Emma. I didn't think I needed to be kind to someone who treated my dear father terribly.
Bob's nowhere to be seen, and suddenly the house is demolished. What's going on?
Mom did it, my son said to Emma.
What, you did?
Emma still didn't call me by my name. It seemed she never really saw me as her mother-in-law. Yes, I did it. I admitted frankly. I didn't think I did anything wrong. My father and I had been the ones being harassed.
Why would you do this? Our house is gone.
Emma was angry. Explaining why I demolished the house seemed troublesome, but I did. That was the house where I spent my childhood. Dad also never wanted to leave it.
David's opinion doesn't matter, right?
Emma's reply made it clear. She only thought about herself, but I couldn't lose here. But the person who married Bob was very mean, never calling me her mother-in-law by my name and always harassing me. Mom. That's why I thought you two didn't need that house, so I demolished it while you were away. No way. Then I said to my son, You promised to take care of Dad, but treated him terribly. I could sue you, you know. My son flinched at the word sue. Stop it, please. The story of a son and daughter-in-law mistreating their elderly dad, it's a common news story, isn't it?
Please stop, Catherine.
I couldn't stop smiling. Emma, who never called me by name, finally started showing respect as her mother-in-law, in a situation where she was in trouble. You finally called me Catherine. My son's face was strained.
I'll do anything if you drop the lawsuit,
Emma said, trembling. Then promise you'll never come near this house again. What? I mean to my father and I, and preferably not to our grandchild. I wouldn't want a child raised by someone like you. Emma apologized to me.
I don't want to be separated from my child.
It's natural for a mother to not want to be apart from her own child, but I had no sympathy left for Emma. Ignoring her words, I continued. What you're feeling now is the pain I've been carrying all this time. Emma looked startled by my words. Had she finally realized? Then I turned to my son. Bob, do you still intend to continue your marriage with this woman? I looked down at my son, who had remained silent up to now. Could he really be okay, living with someone as unpleasant as Emma? Bob, you were part of the harassment towards Dad and I, just like Emma, weren't you? No, that's not it. My son suddenly denied my murmurs. What did he mean? I was always being ordered around. Ordered around? By whom? Emma told me to feed Grandpa in the toilet and to keep him out of the house as much as possible. So that was it. I glared at Emma. She threatened to take all my money if I didn't obey her.
Bob, what are you saying?
Emma objected. How could you? I sighed deeply, utterly exasperated with Emma. Didn't she love my son at all? Was she trying to separate him from his father?
Of course I don't love him.
What? Emma murmured.
I married Bob because he was single until 40 and had a lot of money. I didn't need Bob, just his money.
You married my son for that reason? I asked Emma.
Yes, that's right.
What a thing to say. Don't joke with me. You approached my son for such a reason. Unbelievable. I couldn't contain my anger at Emma's utterly unreasonable reason. I had never shouted so loudly before. Not only my father, but my son too had been threatened. I couldn't consider Emma as a human being anymore for insulting my family. She might even do something terrible to my husband. I would never allow her to hurt my family any further. It's unfortunate, but this is goodbye. I placed Emma's belongings outside and led her to the front door. Don't ever come near my precious family again.
No way.
After pushing Emma out, I closed the front door.
Please, open the door.
I heard Emma knocking repeatedly, but I ignored her. When the sound stopped, I knew she had finally given up and left. My son just stood there stunned and didn't chase after Emma. He must have been really threatened. It's natural he would want to get away. I finally feel relieved. I felt so refreshed, having said everything I'd been unable to say before. When was the last time I felt this good? Since Emma came into our lives, my heart might have never been at rest. I had been constantly stressed and worn down. But after all the harassment I endured, I think I managed to retaliate well against Emma. Peace finally returned to our home. My son divorced Emma without any issues. Emma was initially reluctant, but my son had no intention of reconciling. It was natural, given the daily threats he faced. The grandchild born to them was to be taken care of by my son. I believe it was the right decision. If my son had continued his marriage with Emma, my father would have suffered even more, and my son might have faced more harassment from Emma. I'm sorry about everything. My son apologized to me. Though he was ordered around by Emma, he still harassed my father. It was pitiful, but I couldn't bring myself to forgive him so easily. I had trusted him to take care of my father. He should have consulted me if there were any problems, but he didn't, and simply followed Emma's orders. It was unlikely we could live together again. From now on, please live with your child. I wanted my son to be independent and not return home. Perhaps living at home until 40 made him too dependent. I wanted him to learn to live on his own and to develop the strength to raise his child as a parent. He wasn't just an adult, he was also a responsible parent of a child. I hope he would fulfill his responsibilities as a parent. I understand. With those words, he took his child and left our house. This was for the best, I reassured myself. I felt so relieved that everything had been resolved. My father quickly settled into our home. He seemed more at peace than when he was at the old house. Seeing his smile return made me very happy. Being with family makes any house a happy home. Seeing my father say this, I felt truly relieved. I was glad we could live together. I hope our family continues to live peacefully and harmoniously.